welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Trails. Today we have episode 5, and we are talking about New Hampshire. And I have today with me Abby Levene to talk a little bit about her background and some of the things she's done in New Hampshire. So welcome, Abby. Thanks for talking with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Steph. Stoked to talk to you.
Yeah. So people who know you and follow you know you live in Colorado. So what's your connection to the East Coast?
So I grew up in very rural southwestern New Hampshire. So I guess maybe a lot of people watching this are from New Hampshire, but the White Mountains are up north. I'm from the south, which I think people tend to think of as probably not much is going on, but we have some beautiful little mountains over here and fun things to do. So yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire and still very strongly identify as a New Hampshireite.
Yeah, it sounds like you travel back to visit your family, and then you actually went to school on the East Coast as well.
Yeah, I went to Princeton in New Jersey after, going to school, obviously, in New Hampshire until then. And yeah, I'm actually back home right now, and I come home a couple of times a year and always think I'm going to stay for a week or two, and then I stay for at least a month. So
yeah,
that's what's happening right now.
That's an okay problem to have. It's nice to go home and visit a place you grew up, especially if you have a strong connection and fond memories of the place.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, yeah. So we know, we talked a little bit about some of the advocacy you've done from an early age, and it sounds like you were kind of exposed to it through your family.
Yeah. So my mom is super into environmental causes, and when I was little, she started ripping out all of the milfoil, which is an invasive weed, from our local lake, Dublin Lake. And I somehow, well, first of all, thought she was crazy for just getting her scuba diving license and then going and ripping the weeds out and then putting mats down to prevent them from growing back. And then this led to legislation in New Hampshire that now they have people watching for when boats come in to make sure they're not bringing in invasive weeds into the lakes. And I helped her make a project about it, and then just kind of got roped into helping her with environmental projects from then on. But really, I think my love of just conservation and environmental issues came from just spending time outside here. It's, for those people in New Hampshire, you just kind of living is synonymous with being in the outdoors. Here's a photo of my dad, my sister, and I on Mount Monadnock, which is our local hill, and it happens to actually be about the third most climbed mountain in the world, which is pretty cool. And it's just out the front door. And I also grew up skiing, and that was really a big part of my life too.
Yeah, we share that in common. Growing up in cold winter places, definitely you have to ski to enjoy the winters. And getting out and skiing a bunch. And when you've come back to visit, how have the winters changed over time?
Yeah, it's funny. We just had some family friends over the other night, and they were lamenting how they used to cross-country ski every single day in the winter, and we'd have about 5 feet of snow on the ground. And the last couple winters, when I've come home, there hasn't really been any snow. It's been warm and raining. And for those, it's awesome to see all these people from New Hampshire in the chat. You guys all know that when it's not snowy in New Hampshire, it's just really gross and dark and kind of depressing. So it's really, really sad to see these changes happening before our eyes.
Yeah, it's winter is definitely changing all over the place, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But let's talk about you and trails for a little bit, because you're a relatively new trail athlete. I mean, you've always been kind of in the running scene, but you came from a really successful triathlon career and made the jump over to trail running 3 years ago or so. So what really drove that change?
Well, I think the seed was planted being a little kid here and hiking. I see my friend Carl is in the chat, and he knows we used to hike Mount Monadnock all the time. And I always just thought of trails as hiking, but I really enjoyed spending time on them. And so when I was living in Boulder, training as a professional triathlete, my good friend Claire, who we all know, she dragged me on a trail run one day. And it just blew my mind that there was this whole hidden world in my backyard. I'd lived in Boulder for about 4 years. I'd run for CU in grad school. So I was running every day, and I didn't know that it was like walking through the wardrobe into Narnia. Like there was just this magical place, and I loved the community. I started hanging out with trail runners, and then after I won a triathlon national championship that fall and was like, okay, I need a break. And I ended up doing a 50K trail race, and the environment was so relaxing. People were drinking beer and sitting by a fire pit. And it was like the total opposite of triathlon, which is like so hardcore, type A, go. And so I ended up kind of quitting triathlon right then and switching over to trail running.
Yeah, there's some interesting things you just said there. So one, just casually quit after winning a national championship of like that's a good place to end, go out on top. But two, switching over to the trails, I think you realize the beauty of a place. Like you said, you live in Boulder, and although you can be an athlete and really train hard, that doesn't mean you get out and enjoy your local outdoor culture. And I think that's such an eye-opening experience when athletes who maybe aren't exposed to that get out and see these places in their own backyard. And I think to put a silver lining on COVID right now, that's forcing us to not travel. And I think more people are getting out and exploring their backyard. So I definitely feel that as well. Just, getting out and getting on the trails. It's such a breath of fresh air. And I can see why you just got like head over heels into trail running when you come from that rigid background of, just being so dialed with your training. So we're lucky to have you as a trail runner and advocate.
Steph, I think you were a big part in making me do the switch, because my first race was that 50K in California, and you did the 50-mile race with Claire, and you absolutely crushed it. And I was so impressed with you and Claire running 50 miles, like blew my mind. Like, okay, I want to someday work up to that.
I remember this, Abby, and then we went and had pizza after. It was a great day. Yeah. And you've been working with Protect Winters now for a couple of years too, and that seems to fit really well with your background in advocacy and then your love of the trail. So what has, I guess what initially got you interested in becoming aligned with Protect Winters?
Well, we can blame Claire once again. Claire's amazing. I went up with Claire to a town hall in Breckenridge, Colorado. The city council was voting on whether to go 100% renewable by 2030-ish, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Claire and 3 snow athletes for POW all spoke. And Claire talked about running on those trails in Breck, and the snowboarders and skiers talked about skiing and snowboarding up there. And it just was incredible to watch these town council people and everyone in this meeting listening so intently to these athletes and really valuing what they had to say. And it was a really cool moment for me as an athlete, where you get told a lot to stay in your lane, that athletics and like other issues in the world are totally separate. I feel like that's changing now, but like 4 years ago, it really felt like that still. Yeah. But people really respected what the athletes had to say about climate. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me that I wanted to get involved. And not to mention, the city council unanimously voted to go renewable, which is pretty cool.
That's good positive reinforcement. You get success on your first meeting. But yeah, you realize as an athlete, you have a big reach, and it's really nice to be able to do something, to not just talk about, I want to save planet Earth, but actually take tangible steps. And so that's what, Protect Winters really tries to do, is break down those barriers for athletes and for anyone who wants to get involved and actually make things happen. So it's a great organization for protecting the places we love.
Well, and I think a lot of us, like, this isn't just for professional athletes, like anyone who likes to go outside, you have these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I want to cherish this and make sure it lasts forever. And POW is a great way to actually get involved in that movement.
Absolutely. And we know there's 50 million people in the outdoor state who love recreating on trails, in whatever mode you enjoy. But that's a really big number of people, and we do have the power to make change. And the way we can really use our voices is to get out and vote. So
Yes.
we're really trying to rally the outdoor community to get out and speak up for the places that you love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about New Hampshire. Since you've spent so much time in New Hampshire out on the trails, you've done quite a few pretty cool projects. And we were talking about one that linked about 50 miles of trails, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I came home maybe 4 years ago, and this is when I was really getting into trail running, and I started noticing all these white blazes around my hometown that I had never seen before. And I think that's maybe because just going on the trails makes you kind of pay attention a little bit more than going on a road run. But I was noticing on dirt roads white blazes that were leading into the woods, and I was like, that's weird, what's going on? And then I actually was talking to some other family friends, and they were telling me about this amazing through hike that goes from Mount Sunapee, which is about 50 miles north of where I live, to the top of Mount Monadnock, which is right out the front door. And I just got really intrigued by this trail and ended up running the whole thing 2 falls ago, and happened to set the record for women. But that was like very secondary to this experience of starting at sunrise on Mount Sunapee and running along the spine of southwestern New Hampshire. It's more hilly than I think people would imagine, and ending at the top of Mount Monadnock right as the sun was going down. And this photo was taken by one of my really close friends from kindergarten, who was an angel and kind of followed me along the whole day, like in his car, coming to see me at intersections, and then was at the top when I finished. And it just, this was as the sun was setting. I got up there, and you look back and you see all of the land you've just crossed, which includes 86 private properties, and the trail that people have just let the trail go through. And I was just totally overcome with how amazing it is that in New England, where there's a lot of private land, people are willing to let you go through their land. A lot of people, they ease their land to the state. So while we don't have a lot of public land, unless you're up in the White Mountains, we rely on homeowners to say, okay, this is private land, but the state, I'm easing it to the state to make sure it never gets developed, to ensure that we have these forests and these ecosystems stay intact. And yeah, it was a very emotional moment.
Yeah, and that's a pretty special thing to have, to be able to link all those trails together, and to really have that the ability to run through those private properties and not have them at risk of being sold off. I think open space is really, once it's gone, it's gone. And so protecting it and making sure that we have these spaces for generations to come is another important piece. And it's really cool to think that there's that much trail in your backyard, and you can link it all together. That looks like a really incredible day, sunrise to sunset. That is a full day on the trails.
It's very coincidental, but it goes back to what you were saying earlier about COVID and just finding fun things to do in your backyard. And that was the perfect example of that. I had no idea it existed, and then it was like the best day ever. And so yeah, it's just like, it's a great reminder, I think, that there's so many adventures right out your front door that are worth doing in their own right, and then are really motivating to then, want to vote on climate and vote on land conservation and all of these issues that tie together.
Yeah, so what is the outdoor culture like in New Hampshire? It seems like there is a lot of places for people to get outdoors and recreate. What's it like?
Well, I don't want to speak for the whole state, but down where we are in southwestern New Hampshire, it seems like everyone is outside all the time. Growing up, like, I was just sent outside and you'd come back for dinner, and it really hasn't changed as an adult. All of our family friends, everyone we know in town, it's like, oh yeah, I hiked Monadnock yesterday. Oh yeah, I ski at this mountain. I do this, I do that. everything's outside. We don't have malls really. We don't have like fun things to go do in cities because there are no cities. Like if you want to have fun, you're like reading a book or you're playing in the woods. But it's that being said, it has been really interesting coming home right before this election and seeing this dichotomy of Black Lives Matter signs and Blue Lives Matter signs like right next door. And it's just, there seems to be a little bit, to be honest, a little bit of a disconnect in some places between the idea that like climate and public lands and all of these things we care about are related to how you vote.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I think we're really trying to do is just talk about, we're not going to agree on everything, but talk about the things we do agree on and finding our common ground and why voting matters so much. These issues might seem so far removed, but when it comes down to it, it's putting the policy in place that's going to make big change. And we know New Hampshire is a big state for the upcoming election. And so, yeah, we want to just focus on why the outdoor state of New Hampshire, why we need to get out and vote and really motivate people to make that connection between protecting the places that they love and then making a plan to vote. I think, yeah, you really just kind of hit the nail on the head with just that disconnect a little bit.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get to a point where these issues aren't politicized and you can vote for whoever you want based off of taxes or whatever. But unfortunately, we're in this position right now where it's kind of do or die for the planet. And if we don't put these policies in place now, we're going to be really screwed, pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about climate in New Hampshire. What changes have you seen in like extreme weather or the environment or just, changing climate or just outdoor over the time that you've been, I guess, a resident of the state?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like I didn't really start noticing these issues. I don't know if this is coincidental or not, but until I moved to Colorado, where water law is such a big problem, not enough water, wildfires, all of these really stark environmental issues that kind of hit you in the face. And in New Hampshire, they're a little bit more insidious, equally as powerful, but you just don't notice them like that. They're not like shock and awe headlines on the news. But I was actually just looking at a map recently that shows, it's a map of America, and it shows how much the temperature has increased over the past 100 years based on state. And New Hampshire is actually one of the highest states. It's warmed 2 to 3 degrees here over the last century. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot less snow here in the winter overall. It's been kind of a drought this summer. There hasn't been that much rain. A lot of the rivers that I rely on and little creek beds I rely on for filling up for water on runs are all dry right now, which has made me had to kind of rethink all of these objectives I want to do while I'm out here. Because all of a sudden there's nowhere to get water.
Wow.
And not to mention that we didn't have Lyme disease here growing up, and now it's quite a big problem. Always checking for ticks when I come home, which is related to climate change. The New Hampshire proudly has 10 miles of coastline, and those are in jeopardy because of climate change. My swim coach the other day was just saying how he's like, yeah, if you own land, property on the coast, you need to sell it. Like it's going to be gone in our lifetime.
Yeah.
It's just like endless issues that if you're not really paying attention, you might not notice in 2020, but you'll definitely be noticing in 2030 or 2050.
Right. Yeah. And I think like fires for sure get a lot of the attention because they are so extreme, but things like hurricanes and flooding and, even just like you mentioned, Lyme's disease, those things can be really devastating to an area. And even though they might not make the headlines in the news, it's not just like a random storm here or there. It's just becoming a regular thing, just like fires out west. So I think, we maybe aren't as aware of these issues in some of the other states, especially the East Coast, maybe the Northeast, but they're definitely impacting the communities who live there.
And also our economy too, like fall foliage is a huge boon for tourists in New Hampshire. Like that's how we make a lot of money here. And the fall colors are growing more muted because going back to droughts, yeah, it's not a wildfire, but it's like very analogous to one of not having these beautiful fall colors and then not attracting people here. And then of course, not as much snow, which is bad for the ski industry. And also it's not good for the maple trees having when it's warmer and drier. And maple syrup is a really important thing that we produce here.
Yeah. We don't want to lose the bounty of maple syrup. I mean, these seem like little things, but everything has a consequence, and that's going to affect something else down the line. So, yeah. We have a couple questions from the crowd for you. What future projects do you have lined up? And I know you have something that we've talked a little bit about that's coming up.
Well, first of all, wow, Sydney, Australia. Hello, that's so cool. Someone's tuning in from Sydney. Yeah, I don't love to spray about projects I haven't done yet, but that being said, I am going up to the White Mountains tomorrow, and I'm really excited because I haven't spent that much time there as an adult. So since I started really getting into trail running, so I'm really excited to go do some of the classic loops up there. If anyone has any things I have to do while I'm there, please let me know. I'm hoping to go do the Presidential Traverse, maybe a couple other things. Depends on how many times I postpone my trip to go back to Boulder. But I'm not going to do it this year, but I've spent a fair amount of time this summer trying to map out the perfect route to hike, run from my house to Mount Washington. It's like 200 miles or something, but it's kind of silly, and I haven't done anything that long yet, but that's a very long-term goal. So if anyone has any beta on how to get from Dublin to Hanover, where you can pick up the AT, I'm all ears.
Yeah, that sounds like some good projects in your backyard. So sounds a little bit like more exploring, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, that's going back to COVID. I think, it just reminded me that we don't have to always be focusing on races and winning and setting records. And you can push yourself and find really incredible challenges that are really meaningful to you that don't necessarily need to be this incredible thing that other people find incredible. Like, who really cares? Like, the point is to make yourself happy.
And in some ways, it's way more meaningful to set out and do a project like that, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
We have another question here that says, what kind of effects have you seen from climate change in the alpine zone up in the Whites? Has there been any loss of any biodiversity upwards of 4,000 feet?
Oh, honestly, I don't know. I can give you a better report when I get up there this week, but I am not a biologist and have not been recording all of the plants. I can tell you that up in the subalpine at my front door, the wildflowers are looking really beautiful still, so that's really encouraging. We got some flowers here that are only found in the White Mountains.
Wow.
Those are the two places, but it is kind of sad to think that if it starts getting a lot warmer in the summer and it's too dry up there, that they won't be there.
Right. Yeah, the seasons seem to be shifting quite a bit all over the U.S. And so it's just kind of like, how we traditionally think of like summer, fall, winter, spring, those are shifting quite a bit. And that is going to change, a lot of the biodiversity at different elevations. It's probably a lot to be determined how that's all going to unfold.
Yeah, it's a gamble that I don't really want to take. It's like, it's now.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a good time again to mention the Make a Plan to Vote tool. We're going to end this session we'll just take you right to the page where you can make a plan, and you can share this with all of your friends and family. It's just a way to actually think ahead of time and make a plan for how you're going to get your absentee ballot, or how are you going to vote. Because when we think about these things and we make a commitment, we're much more likely to do it. So take a few minutes and just fill that out and share it with whoever you think needs to see that information.
And I think that's especially important for New Hampshire because it's a little bit harder to get an absentee ballot here than it is in other states. So even though it sounds kind of silly to make a plan to vote, it's like voting takes 2 seconds, and you do it once a year, or 3 times a year. As you just said, Steph, it is so important that you actually do it. Like, thinking about doing it is not good enough.
Absolutely. And you're right, with places that, aren't usually doing the mail-in vote or the absentee ballots, it does take a little bit of time to get it organized. So plan ahead so it's not scrambling at the last minute, because you don't want to lose your opportunity to use your voice.
Amen.
So yeah, thanks Abby, for kind of telling us a little bit more about New Hampshire and walking us through some of the things you've done and are planning to do. I think it's really cool to kind of learn about another area. And we have one more episode of Tales from the Trails coming up, and we are going to be talking to Canyon Woodward on Thursday, and we're going to be talking about some of the work that he's done in Maine. So tune in for our last episode. I'm really excited about it. It's gonna be a really fun chat, I think.
I love Canyon. It'd be great. He's the coolest.
Yes. Canyon is really an amazing human being. So it's going to be a great conversation from an academic standpoint and from a trail enthusiast standpoint. So really looking forward to that. And again, we want to thank Trail Runner Magazine for supporting this series. And like the previous episodes, 2 lucky winners from today will get a year-long subscription to Trail Runner Magazine to keep up to date on all the happenings across the country on the trail scene. So thank you very much, Trail Runner. And then we want to end with wrapping up and taking you to the Make a Plan to Vote. And like we mentioned earlier, the outdoor state is the biggest state in the United States, 50 million people. And we just really want you all to use your voices, make a plan, get out there, vote, and protect the places we love. So again, Abby, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me, Steph.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
As runners, we have to stand up for our playgrounds, for the quiet dirt road miles out the back door, the forest loop that washes the day away. It's important that we protect these places that we love. To protect our winners and our planet, we must protect our trails. Together, with our feet, our voices, and our votes, we can save our great escapes. Make a plan to vote.